Ann Hoiberg. I'm a member of Pace Television Productions, and I host a series on world peace, global hotspots, and the United Nations. Today, my guest and I will be discussing the situation in the Philippines with an emphasis on the peacemaking that is currently going on in Mindanao. We also will be focusing on the role of women in the ceasefire as well as in the peacemaking endeavors. We'll also talk about the human rights and how to promote the human rights of indigenous people. And we'll conclude by talking about the stability of peace in that region. My guest today is Ann Arnado, and I welcome you to the show. She's the Deputy Director of the Initiatives for International Dialogue, which is a non-governmental organization in the Philippines. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Ann.
And let's start out by talking about the Philippines. Can you describe a little bit about the geography of the Philippines?
Well, the Philippines is in the Southeast Asia region, and we are a country that is in an archipelago. We are composed of 7,100 islands.
7,100 islands?
Yes. And we have three major groupings of islands in the Philippines. We have Luzon, Visayas, and in Mindanao. This is the island where I am coming from.
And you live in Mindanao?
Yes, I was born there, and I'm currently working there as well.
And what is the population of the Philippines?
Philippines has over 80 million population.
And what is the economic situation like, or what is your government like?
Well, as of now, we have a very big problem in terms of the political stability in the country. There's a lot of demonstrations going on in Manila, which is calling for the resignation of our president.
And your president is a woman, right?
Yes.
Now this isn't the first time the Philippines has had a woman president, right?
Yes, we had one before, Corazon Aquino, in 1986.
What is the difficulty with the current president?
As of now, she's facing a very big controversy with regards to the result of the previous election, and there is a tape that that recorded all her conversation with an election commissioner, and they were discussing about how to win the election, and so it caused a lot of outrage from the Filipinos.
And it seems to me that your parliament has a relatively high percentage of women serving also.
Yes, we have women who are serving in the parliament, but most of them are the wives or daughters of traditional politicians whose term had already expired. Because under the Constitution, like if you're a congressman, you can only serve for 3 years. And so if you cannot anymore run for re-election, this politician endorse their wives.
I see.
As to replace them, to maintain their power.
Now you're here in San Diego. You've been here in residence as a woman peacemaker at the Joan B. Kroc Institute for Peace and Justice. How does one become a peacemaker? How did you happen to just come to San Diego and to serve as a peacemaker here?
Well, I arrived here in September, last September 24.
Of 2005?
Yeah, of this year. And I'll be here for 8 weeks. This is already my 7th week as a woman peacemaker at the John B. Kroc Institute for Peace and Justice. There are 4 women in our batch now for this year. I have 3 other companions from Uganda, Zimbabwe, and Cambodia. And together we are coming here for 8 weeks to document our peacemaking story and to also meet the San Diego community and contribute and share our stories on how we promote peace and how we work for justice back in our conflict areas.
Now, your conflict area is in Mindanao, right?
Yes.
And what has your organization been doing in that region? And how did you become involved in trying to resolve this conflict? And how long has it been going on?
Well, the conflict in Mindanao is one which we have inherited from our colonial past. The Philippines has been colonized by Spain for 300 years, and we were under the American government for another 50 years until we got our independence in 1945. And the problem in Mindanao has been there because there are issues with regards to the indigenous peoples and the Bangsamoros in Mindanao who believe that they were not part of the colonial territories of Spain and the U.S.
What are the ethnic breakdowns in Mindanao?
Mindanao has 20 million population, and we have like three major groupings of people in Mindanao. We have the indigenous peoples, we have the Bangsamoro people who are largely Muslims, Muslim communities, and we have the Christian settlers who were sent to Mindanao under a resettlement program by the Commonwealth government of the U.S. in the 1940s,
And so you have the three groups representing 20 million people.
Yes.
Out of the total in the Philippines of 80 million.
You're right.
Now, is there conflict among all three, or how has this conflict even evolved?
Well, basically the conflict there is an armed conflict ongoing between the government, the armed forces of the Philippines and the military. But between Muslims and Christians, we are not fighting each other. We are not enemies. And in fact, in the conflict, in the series of wars that we had in year 2000, year 2003, we have Christians, we have Muslims, we have indigenous peoples who are staying together in the evacuation centers, and we are on the same boat.
So I don't understand, where is the conflict? Who is the enemy and of whom?
Well, it is the Moro Islamic Liberation Front. This is an armed group of the Bangsamoro people, and they are waging a struggle for identity, for their territories, for their ancestral domain, and for their Islamic way of life as Muslims in Mindanao.
And how has your organization been involved in creating a ceasefire?
As of now, there is an ongoing ceasefire agreement between the government and the MILF. And in 2003, there was a very big war which displaced over 300,000 people in the communities. And our organization in the Mindanao People's Caucus organized a grassroots ceasefire monitoring team that will ensure the strictest implementation of the ceasefire at the ground level.
What is your role in the caucus? And tell me the name of the caucus again.
Well, it's called the Mindanao People's Caucus, and it is an interfaith alliance of grassroots leaders. We have members who are Christians, who are Catholic priests, who are ustads or Muslim scholars. We have indigenous traditional leaders who are with us. We have women who are working and to promote the participation of the grassroots in the peace process. And we are trying to participate. The peace talks should not be, we believe, should not only be between the government and the rebels, but it should also involve us, the people in the communities who are also affected by the armed conflict. And so in this peace negotiation, which is ongoing between the actors in conflict, we are promoting that we should be able to participate, we should have our voice there, and it should be transparent.
So the ceasefire has been successful, and what are we looking at now? Do we have 2 years of peace as of 2005?
Well, the ceasefire is just a temporary cessation of hostilities, and it is meant to create space which is conducive for talking. And so this is just a temporary thing. What we want is for the parties to come up with a resolution, a principled agreement that will bring us, that will resolve our conflict in Mindanao. And it is about providing, recognizing the lands of the indigenous peoples, respecting their way of life, promoting their religion, and making them feel that they are part of the Republic of the Philippines.
What role have women played in creating and maintaining the ceasefire?
As of now, we have a lot of women who are members of the Bantay ceasefire. Bantay ceasefire is like Bantay means watch, so it's a ceasefire watch.
Ceasefire Bantay means watch.
Yes, and these are evacuees. These are women in the evacuation centers who have already returned to their communities. And whenever there are skirmishes or troop movements or armed encounter between the rebels and the government, these women immediately report to us, to the Bantay ceasefire, so that we can dispatch our teams, our peacekeepers in their community, and we will try to de-escalate the violence.
I see. And what is your role in this? Are you the person that these women report to as they're monitoring what's going on in their communities?
As of now, I am the Secretary General of the Mindanao People's Caucus. So I do a lot of organizing, lobbying, coordinating with the generals, with the field commanders, with the leadership of the MILF. We coordinate with the ceasefire committee and ensure that our main agenda is humanitarian protection, the welfare of the women and children, and to de-escalate violence in the community. And so that's what I do. And then whenever there are reports of fighting in the area, we immediately I go to the communities and report and make our report and submit it to the ceasefire committee. There were occasions in the past when we were caught in the middle of a shooting war between these forces, and it was it entails a lot of risk also.
Yes.
And you have to take the risk if you are in this armed conflict, which is where the rebels and the soldiers are saying that we are putting our life on the line. And so as a peacemaker, as advocates, peace advocates, I think we should also take a little risk.
Now, how many people are actually working with you? Can you identify different parts of Mindanao that are being addressed by people in your organizations?
The MPC is composed of 23 organizations, and we're composed of youth organizations, indigenous peoples, we have women, we have evacuees, and we are practically present in the conflict areas in central Mindanao. So we're talking here of about like 3 provinces which are considered as hotspots or trigger points of conflict, and there we try to help prevent conflict. And so we are saying that if you agreed on a ceasefire, both parties should be able to honor it, both parties should be accountable for its implementation.
How has this impacted daily life in that area? Have crops been able to be planted and harvested, and food is provided for everybody, or are there any humanitarian issues related to what's going on in Mindanao?
My experience with Bantay ceasefire in the past is that it's really difficult for women to be in the evacuation centers since they will just be waiting for relief assistance.
So there are evacuation centers. Are they throughout Mindanao?
mostly in central Mindanao, where the where the conflict is ongoing. So whenever there are fightings, they immediately run to the evacuation centers. And so here it's a terrible life, especially among women and children who are carrying the impact of the war itself.
Yes.
And so in this situation, you see a lot of children who are dying of preventable diseases like measles and diarrhea. And so because of the poor condition in the evacuation center, a lot of children die. And I encounter a woman, a Maranao woman named Jamalia, who lost her mind because of this situation, because of the trauma that happened to her. Her name is Jamalia, and she is 35 years old. She's a Muslim woman, and she has 10 children. And this series of displacement has affected her psychologically. And so in one of her recent return from the evacuation center, Jamalia just had enough. And so she decided that she will just take her own life.
Did she?
She wanted to take her own life, but she had a problem because she had 2 children who were 6 and 7 years old, who are still young. And so despite that condition, Jamalia as a mother thought, what will happen to my children when I die? Who will take them to the evacuation centers? And so Jamalia decided that I will just take my children with me. And so one afternoon when it was raining heavily in her house, she killed her own children.
Oh my gosh, and killed herself.
And after that, she killed herself. But the tragic story is that Jamalia survived, and her 2 young children died. And so until now, Jamalia is still looking for her 2 dead children.
That is so sad. Is the government in Manila doing anything about what's going on in Mindanao?
There are efforts for rehabilitation. The international community is there. We have the United Nations who are implementing development projects, rehabilitation of the conflict areas. But our main interest here is really to come up with a formula, a peace formula, where everybody can support, where everybody can participate, and it should not exclude other sectors in the society. So if it should not only be the rebels and the government talking, but a woman like Jamalia should be able to say her piece, should be able to participate in that process, since it is her life that is affected by this armed conflict.
Yes. Now there is Resolution 1325 that certainly could be implemented in that area to have women more involved in the peace process and in the ceasefire.
Right.
Are you seeing any women involved in any of the negotiations?
Well, I was here in San Diego last year for the 1325 conference in promoting the role of women in security processes. But in Mindanao, it's still a long way. Like for instance, this month we have the Mindanao Week of Peace, and it's an event which mobilizes a lot of groups to push forward our agenda for peace in Mindanao. And the theme is about the Millennium Development Goals.
The Millennium Development Goals.
Yeah. Well, I have nothing against the MDG.
Yes.
But for me, the theme of the 1325 would have been more appropriate to our situation.
That's true.
It would have been more relevant.
Yes.
How do we bring in the women to the negotiating table? Because I believe that if we bring in the women there, we can change the formula. We can change a lot of things in the negotiation.
which is certainly true in any situation, I should think. Let's talk about U.S. involvement. Is the United States involved in any way in the conflict areas?
The U.S. government has been involved. Of course, it has always been involved in the affairs of the Philippines and in Mindanao through the years. And lately, in 2003, President George Bush went to the Philippines. And when he spoke to Congress in his speech, he said that the government of the U.S. will support the peace process in Mindanao, and it appointed the United States Institute for Peace as a third-party facilitator. And of course, we welcome that the gesture of support for that. But at the same time, we also see the U.S. training our soldiers for military exercises. They are also there conducting joint pursuits on counterterrorism and all this training, military stuff.
Did you think that that was counterproductive or inappropriate? What are your views about that?
For me, it's quite inconsistent. You offer peace on one hand, and you are preparing the soldiers to be more effective in war, in waging war. And so, where do we go? What is our track? And so that's a question that remains with me.
It seems to me that about 600 U.S. military advisors were brought to your island. Are they still there?
We still have, as of now, we have a lot of trainings by U.S. experts. They're conducting trainings among our policemen, among our soldiers. They're also conducting humanitarian. They said they are involved in humanitarian work. And in fact, there was a time when I was able to attend one of their trainings. Mm-hmm. They invited me to talk for 1 hour about human rights among the policemen. And of course, you train them for 3 months of the military training and then 1 hour for human rights, and it's really, but for me it's still a venue. Mm-hmm. Where you can educate, where you can get support and raise awareness also about human rights, and especially our police.
Have you been doing any training sessions within the indigenous peoples about their human rights? Is that part of your mission also?
Yes, one of the active members of our organization in the MPC are the indigenous peoples, and this is quite an issue since the indigenous peoples did not wage an armed struggle against the government. It is only the Muslim population. But the substantive agenda in the negotiation now is ancestral domain, which also concerns the indigenous peoples. It's not just the Bangsamoro who are claiming for their territories. Even the indigenous are also entitled to that. But as of now, they're trying to participate. They said that we want also to participate in the peace talks because you're talking about ancestral domain, which is a core issue of the IPs. And so, but it's quite difficult since the government is saying, why are you participating in the peace talks when we are not fighting? And so it actually put incentive for you to fight first, to raise arms, and then after that, we can already talk. So this is a frustration for the indigenous people since they said that, do you have to wait for us to wage arms also before you even listen to us?
Seems like it should be the other way around.
Yeah.
What are the issues concerning land reform? Is this one of the key issues for the indigenous people?
Within Mindanao, it's basically a claim to their territories. Since because of the series of migration and resettlement, Most of the lands of the indigenous peoples and the Bangsamoro have been taken away from them. And so now they are like minoritized within their own area, and they are now in the interior part. They're pushed into the interior, and most of the fertile lands and the plains are now with the Christian population. And so, the problem as of now is that even within this area where they are now, people are still coming in because they discovered that there's a lot of mining minerals within the indigenous people's territories. And so the IPs are complaining because first you have driven us away from the plains. Now we are in the mountains. Then you started cutting all the trees, and now you are digging our land. And so where will we go?
Where will they go?
Yeah.
I can understand the despair of those people. And part of your work is trying to resolve those issues. Is that right?
Right.
And so you certainly have a full plate trying to create peace and harmony among those different factions. And what help are you getting from, say, the United States? Are we providing any funding along with military aid?
With regards to my work?
Yes.
No. We don't, and even we don't get funding from the U.S. government, and I don't think we will apply for one because our work, especially in the ceasefire monitoring, the only security that we have in the area is our independence.
I see.
And credibility. And so, for instance, if we will be perceived like an organization funded by the U.S., then they might color us into something else. We don't know. But we are very careful with that. And so we want to maintain our independence. That's why most of our our monitors, ceasefire monitors, are volunteers.
And we now have to say goodbye, and I wish you continued success as a peacemaker